ولا تعجل بالقرآن من قبل أن يقضى إليك وحيه وقل رب زدني علما.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، واشهد ان لا اله الا الله وحده لا شريك له، واشهد ان محمدا عبده ورسوله. اما بعد. Today then we're on the fourth principle from the 6 principles, and the fourth principle, al-aslu al-rabi' bayanu al-ilmi wal-ulama wal-fiqh wal-fuqaha وَبَيَانُ مَنْ تَشَبَّهَ بِهِمْ وَلَيْسَ مِنْهُمْ. The fourth principle is a clarification of what knowledge is and who the scholars are, and what fiqh is and who the fuqaha are, and a clarification regarding those who are essentially impostors. People who claim to be scholars, claim to be upon the correct knowledge, and in reality they are not. So this principle will highlight what knowledge is and who the scholars actually are, and who the others that pretend to be upon knowledge and pretend to be scholars are, and they are not in reality scholars. So here as Shaykh al-Fawzan, he says, هذا أصل عظيم. This is a great principle. وهو بيان المراد بالعلم, because it clarifies to us what the point is, what the intent is when we speak about knowledge. And that's very important, because as a Muslim, all of us need to gain knowledge of our religion. We all need to learn about our religion, but we need to understand then what is the knowledge that we need to be learning. Because if you go to the different groups and the different sects, they will all be teaching you knowledge as they claim. They will all have their gatherings, they will all be doing their khutbahs, they will have knowledge that they are giving. But is that knowledge that they are giving the actual knowledge of the Quran and the Sunnah that we need to be learning? It is important to distinguish what the correct and actual knowledge is. So as Shaykh al-Fawzan says, وَهُوَ أَنَّ الْعِلْمَ هُوَ الْعِلْمُ الشَّرْعِي المبني على كتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم. The knowledge, it is the knowledge or the Islamic knowledge, the legislative knowledge, knowledge of the Sharia, which is built upon the Quran and the Sunnah. That is the default understanding of what knowledge is. Knowledge that is built upon the Quran and the Sunnah, legislative knowledge, knowledge of what Allah said in the Quran and what the Prophet ﷺ said in the Sunnah. That is the default of knowledge. So now when you go to other people or you come across other people and their knowledge, all it is about is talking about the rulers, for example, talking about how evil the rulers are and how this ruler does this and that ruler does that, and all of their khutbah every week is on that topic, all of their gatherings are upon that topic. But this is happening to the Muslims and that is happening to the Muslims, and the Muslim rulers are doing this thing bad and that thing bad. That is all their knowledge that they are giving. Then you can see straight away there is a problem there. If you go somewhere else or you come across others and their knowledge that they are giving is simply be good to your neighbors, be good to the neighbors and the people, and knock on their doors, bring them to the mosque, they need to pray. That is a good knowledge. But if that is their default knowledge, then they haven't given you the core of the knowledge from the Quran and the Sunnah. They haven't given you the core of the knowledge of what Allah told us in the Quran, or the core of the knowledge of what the Prophet ﷺ taught us in the Sunnah. They have only selected parts here or there, and the actual knowledge of the Quran and the Sunnah they have erred in. And so they don't understand their aqeedah properly, because they are not taking it from the knowledge of the Quran and the Sunnah. They don't understand issues of tawheed properly, because they are not focusing on the actual knowledge of the Quran and the Sunnah that talks about aqeedah, talks about tawheed. So it's important straight away to recognize what this knowledge is and what the core of this knowledge is, so that when you come across different people and you come across different so-called sheikhs, and many people these days call themselves a sheikh, everybody is a sheikh on YouTube. So you have to be wary of recognizing what the true knowledge is. How can we determine what that true knowledge is? One of the methods is very simple: to look at what the knowledge of the Prophet ﷺ was, how he taught, what he taught. Because if we examine what the Prophet ﷺ taught, how he taught it, where he taught it, how long he taught it for, then that will give us an idea of what we need to be teaching, what we need to be doing when it comes to knowledge. Look at what the Prophet used to do. Very simple way. So when we look at what the Prophet ﷺ used to do with knowledge, you'll notice from the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ that when he became a prophet at the age of 40, then for the next decade or more, in fact, possibly 13 years approximately, for that period of time, then it was all about tawheed purely. And then even after that period of time, even after the hijrah, it was all based upon that same tawheed and aqeedah. When you look at the Quran, every single ayah of the Quran talks about tawheed and aqeedah. So you can see, if every single ayah of the Quran has some element of tawheed and aqeedah in it, then surely that must be one of the core aspects of knowledge. And in fact, as the scholars they mention, the core aspect of knowledge, the highest of knowledge, the most virtuous of knowledge, then it is knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowledge of aqeedah, knowledge of tawheed. It is not, as the people wish to misguide you, that their knowledge is all about what's going on in this country and that country, all about the politics of here and there, and what this ruler is doing and what that ruler is doing. Not regarding that type of politics. That is not the core of the knowledge. That is not the core of the understanding of what you learn. So here when it talks about al-aslu al-rabi' bayan al-ilmi wal-ulama, then it is in reference to that knowledge, the basics of knowledge. And that knowledge is the knowledge of the Quran, the knowledge of the Sunnah, the knowledge of what Allah said, the knowledge of what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. هذا هو العلم النافع. That is the beneficial knowledge. Beneficial knowledge isn't politics. We're not politicians. The rulers are there to deal with the affairs of the lands, and we've spoken about that before. They are, of course, to abide by the laws of Allah too, but it's not for us to waste our time, all of our gatherings and all of our sittings and our khutab, talking about politics and talking about this ruler, talking about that ruler. That isn't knowledge. That isn't knowledge. You've not learned anything more about the Sunnah, what you're supposed to do when you pray, when you make wudu. You've not learned. Talking about politics all day. So here, bayanul ilmi wal ulama, the clarification of what knowledge is and who the scholars are. The beneficial knowledge is the knowledge of the Quran and the Sunnah. Other types of knowledge, academic knowledge, knowledge of science and maths and English and other things, medicine, of course they are forms of knowledge. But Islamically, when we talk about knowledge and gaining knowledge, the default in that is talking about the knowledge of the Quran and the Sunnah, knowledge of your religion, knowledge of how to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فإذا قيل العلم والذي فيه الفضل فإن المراد به العلم الشرعي. So when it is said knowledge, when knowledge is mentioned, and Islamically we talk about seeking knowledge, then that knowledge isn't maths and science and those academic affairs. That is a type of knowledge. But here the knowledge is knowledge of Quran, knowledge of the Sunnah, knowledge of what this religion is. These days though, as Shaykh al-Fawzan says, صار العلم الآن يطلق على علم الحرف والصناعات والطب وغير ذلك مع أنه قد يكون جهلا لأنه قد يعتريه شيء من الخطأ الكثير. These days the Shaykh says, for people, knowledge, it has become those academic affairs. It's all about getting the qualifications and earning the money and the wages. People have thought knowledge to be the academics and the professions and everything. But the reality of knowledge is knowledge of your religion. That is what will bring you success in this world and in the afterlife. It's mentioned in the Quran. Allah said, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. That indeed those who truly fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are the people of knowledge. Those who have understanding of their religion. They're not just Muslim by name. They are Muslim in reality. They know the Quran, they know the Sunnah, they know what they are supposed to do as a believer. They know how to do their acts of worship. They know why they are doing those acts of worship, or in some cases, who they are doing that act of worship for, even if the reasoning is unknown to us. So they are the scholars, the people of knowledge. وهم علماء الشرع الذين يعرفون الله عز وجل. So they are the scholars who know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the Shaykh, he goes on and he says, المقصود بيان من تشبه بأهل العلم وليس هو من أهل العلم إنما يحاكي أهل العلم ويتشبه بهم وهو لا يملك رصيدا من العلم وهذا ضرره عظيم على نفسه وعلى الأمة. So the one who pretends to be upon knowledge and is not upon knowledge in reality, but he attempts to emulate those who are upon knowledge, to resemble them, and he doesn't actually have any knowledge, then the harm of those types of people is great. Harm upon themselves and harm upon others. And that is something which is widespread these days. all of these different people on social media platforms promoting themselves basically, that they come out with all types of fatwa, all types of rulings, having their Q&A sessions, and they are not qualified and they don't have ability, and so they misguide themselves and they misguide others at the same time too, with these deviated claims of theirs, with these false fatwas of theirs. That's why the Salaf, they used to say, إِنَّ هَذَا الْعِلْمَ دِينَ فَانظُرُوا عَمَّنْ تَأْخُذُونَ دِينَكُمْ. That indeed this knowledge you are seeking is of your religion. So look to whom you seek your knowledge from, whom you seek your religion from. This isn't something like maths or English. It's not just an academic affair. It is the affair of your religion, of your accountability on that day of judgment. So you have to make sure you take that knowledge from the correct sources and not to blindly take it from anybody who comes along promoting himself as a sheikh. And those people have no background in study, no background in knowledge, or even if they've done something, they are weak in their studies, weak in their knowledge. Many people now, they come back from being abroad. They've been abroad, they've spent time abroad, and they come back now and they are promoted as sheikh and sheikh this and mufti this because they've done some studying abroad. The reality is, just because somebody has studied abroad, even that in of itself isn't your qualification to put you to the level of sheikh or mufti or whatever it may be. That is not the case. A person may have gone and studied and benefited hardly anything. For some people that is the case. They may have gone and failed their exams, failed and failed so many times, barely scraped through. But when they come back to this country, they come back to the West, nobody's going to know that. All the people are going to know is that he went abroad and he studied and now he's come back, he's a sheikh. So you have to be careful. It's not just anybody you take knowledge from. Has to be somebody who's qualified, who's capable, who has studied, who has ability, who has understanding, comprehends what he's saying. Cannot just be anyone, must be the students of knowledge, the mashayikh, the scholars. That's who you take the knowledge from, not social media. Social media is not your source of knowledge. As Shaykh Al-Fawzan, he spoke about this too. He said, do not take your knowledge from these random messages that go around. A person forwards a random message that the Prophet ﷺ said, do this and do that on this night, on that night, and you'll get this reward and you'll get that reward. That is not how you randomly take knowledge without any references, without any sources, without establishing whether it's true or not. Random messages going around, that is not to be taken unless they are from trustworthy sources with trustworthy translations, referenced properly. Otherwise you do not. These messages, they go around saying you must forward this to so many contacts, and if you don't forward it, then be warned from the punishment coming upon you from Allah. They put these types of threats into the messages even. And as Shaykh Al-Fawzan said, do not listen to them. Do not pay attention to those types of messages. So this knowledge is taken from the correct sources, not from those who pretend to be scholars. And there are so many of them today, some of them who've become famous through this act of theirs of pretending to be scholars, giving fatwas, and the people have blindly followed them. And in the end, they've given fatwas that are in opposition to the Quran and the Sunnah. They've given fatwas that are not at all evidenced by the Quran and the Sunnah. And so many of them there are. So here, وَبَيَانُ مَنْ تَشَبَّهَ بِهِمْ وَلَيْسَ مِنْهُمْ, a clarification of those who resemble them, attempt to portray themselves as scholars, but they are not. So this principle it is talking about the importance of this knowledge. And seeking knowledge is very important. Seeking knowledge of the religion is a must. It is a must, an obligation upon us all. The level of knowledge we have to seek, that differs. But as a minimum level, it's an obligation upon everyone. Because you cannot say, if somebody comes and asks you, what's your aqeedah? You can't say, I'm not a shaykh, I don't know. You have to ask somebody else. How can you not know what your aqeedah is? If somebody comes and asks you, how do you pray properly according to the Sunnah? You can't say, I don't know, I'm not a shaykh, go and ask somebody else. Then how do you pray 5 times a day? Somebody asks you how to make wudu, you can't say, I don't know, ask somebody else. How are you making wudu 5 times a day? So there are certain levels of knowledge, the minimum quantity that everybody has to have. That is mentioned by the scholars. What is that minimum quantity? How do you define it? It is defined as the quantity of knowledge that enables you to worship Allah properly. Everybody needs a minimum quantity of knowledge to be able to worship Allah properly. Meaning, if you didn't have that minimum quantity of knowledge, you wouldn't be able to worship Allah properly. If you didn't know how to make wudu, then how are you going to make wudu every day and pray 5 times a day? If you don't know how to pray, then how are you going to do your prayer 5 times a day? If you don't know how to fast and what the rulings are, then how are you going to fast in Ramadan? These are all minimum quantities of knowledge we all need to enable us to worship Allah. So any level of knowledge that you need as a bare minimum to enable you to worship Allah, then it's an obligation. You can't say, I don't know how to make wudu, I'm not a scholar, ask somebody else. I don't know how to pray, I'm not a scholar, ask somebody else. These are minimum quantities of knowledge you as an individual need, because without them, you can't worship Allah. And it's an obligation upon you to worship Allah. Therefore, it's an obligation upon you to gain that minimum quantity of knowledge. It's an obligation upon you to worship Allah. Therefore, it's an obligation upon you to gain that minimum quantity of knowledge that enables you to worship Allah. Because without it, it means you can't worship Allah, which means you are not fulfilling the obligation upon you. So everybody has to gain knowledge of the Quran and the Sunnah to that minimum quantity at least that enables you to worship Allah. And that's why throughout the Quran and the Sunnah there are many examples of encouragement for us to seek knowledge about our religion. Many ayat in the Quran, many ahadith in the Sunnah that talk about seeking knowledge and encourage us to seek knowledge. In the Quran, for example, Allah mentioned in one part, هل يستوي الذين يعلمون والذين لا يعلمون? Are they equal, the ones who know and the ones who do not know? Are they equal, the ones who have knowledge and the ones who do not have knowledge? And as Shaykh Al-Uthaymeen rahimahullah said, clearly the answer to that is no. No, they are not equal. The ones who have knowledge and the ones who do not. The ones who understand their religion and the ones who do not. Clearly they are not equal. The one who has knowledge and learns and strives to understand the Quran and the Sunnah, gains that knowledge, is obviously superior to the one who remains ignorant and negligent of learning the Quran and the Sunnah. Because the one who has more knowledge will be able to practice his religion better than the one who doesn't. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in a hadith, من سلك طريقا يلتمس فيه علما سهل الله له به طريقا إلى الجنة. that whomsoever treads upon a pathway seeking by it knowledge, then Allah will make his pathway to paradise easy. How? Because if he is upon the pathway of seeking knowledge, he's striving, he's learning, he's understanding, memorizing, then the more he does of that, the more he can practice his religion properly, the more he can worship Allah properly, which means his pathway to paradise is becoming easier for him. Whereas the person who doesn't gain that knowledge, doesn't strive, then it's more difficult for him to understand how to worship Allah properly, how to fully practice his religion properly, and therefore his path is a lot more difficult. Hence, seeking knowledge, it simplifies your pathway to paradise. In the same narration, it even mentions the virtue and the high rank and standing of the one who seeks knowledge. It mentions how the angels lower their wings to the one who seeks knowledge. وَإِنَّ الْمَلَائِكَةَ لَتَضَعُ أَجْنِحَتَهَا لِطَالِبِ الْعِلْمِ رِضًا بِمَا يَصْنَعُ. That the angels, they lower their wings to the student of knowledge, the one learning and practicing his religion in humility and humbleness to him, in modesty, humility, humbleness to him, that they are pleased with what he is doing. They are pleased and happy that this servant of Allah is using his time in seeking knowledge. They are happy and content and pleased with the actions of the servant seeking knowledge in striving upon that path. And that narration does not necessitate even physically going out in the path. Of course, by default, that's what it means. Whomsoever treads upon a pathway seeking by it knowledge, then his pathway to paradise will be made easy. Treads upon a pathway, goes out in search of knowledge, goes and travels to the lands where the knowledge is, where the scholars are, goes and travels to the gatherings of knowledge, the sittings of knowledge, where the Quran and the Sunnah is being learnt, goes out and travels to them physically. But also, if a person is unable to do that, a person genuinely cannot travel out to seek knowledge. Maybe he lives in a country where it's impossible for him to leave and go out for whatever reasons, legitimate reasons. Maybe within that country there are gatherings and marakis and masajid, but he lives in some remote area too far to be able to get there. Then in those types of circumstances, or even for example with the women, if sometimes they are unable to leave their homes, responsibilities with their children, etc., they're not able to go to the gathering of knowledge that is occurring, there may be legitimate reasons. Those who have legitimate reasons, so they stay in their homes and they seek the knowledge from their homes. Maybe they listen online to the class that is going on. Maybe they listen to the recordings afterwards of the class that was going on. Maybe they listen to the CDs of the scholars and translations. They read books at home and follow the explanations. They read and they listen and they send their questions to the scholars. They may be doing so much in seeking knowledge from their homes if legitimately they are unable to go and attend. Then in that case, they would still be within the virtue of this hadith. They would still be considered as having been upon that path to knowledge, that they have gone out treading the path of knowledge, even though physically they didn't go out. And as Shaykh Zayd al-Madkhali rahimahullah ta'ala mentioned too, for those who legitimately cannot go physically to the gathering of knowledge that is happening due to distance or illness or whatever the reason may be that is legitimate, so they follow online that class as it's occurring live, then the Shaykh said, inshaAllah, they still get the reward of the ones who physically enter that gathering, and the narration how it mentions the serenity of Allah descends upon them, etc., that all of that reward, insha'Allah, they still get it, even though they may be thousands of miles away possibly from where that circle is occurring. So that is an encouragement for seeking knowledge. Other narrations, other examples where the Prophet ﷺ encouraged us to seek knowledge. In one narration it mentions, مَنْ يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ, that whomsoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants goodness for, then Allah gives him understanding of the religion. If you gain knowledge of your religion, that is a sign of goodness for you. That you have an understanding of the Quran, an understanding of the Sunnah, and that you are practicing that Quran and Sunnah that you've learned, then that is good for you. That is a sign of goodness for you. And that's what the Prophet ﷺ said. مَنْ يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. Whomsoever Allah wants goodness for, then Allah gives him knowledge of the religion. So another example there in that narration, highlighting the importance of knowledge and the virtue of knowledge. The Salaf, they used to say various statements in encouragement of seeking knowledge. In one of them it mentions, attributed to Ali radiallahu anhu, he said, لِكُلِّ صَاحِبِ صَنَاعَةٍ آلَةٍ, that every person who has a profession that he's working in, whatever profession that may be, then he will have his tools for that particular profession. A painter will have his rollers and paints and tubs and things. An engineer will have his equipment. A mechanic will have his spanners, etc. Every person in his profession has their tools and their equipment to do their profession. And then they said, as for the people of Islam, those who are Muslim, then they have their tools too. They have their tools and their equipment to practice Islam. Just like the doctor has his stethoscope to practice medicine, and the mechanic has his tools to practice or to do the fixing of the cars, then a Muslim has his tools to practice his religion. Then what are those tools? They are indeed knowledge. The Muslim has knowledge. That is his tool to be able to practice his religion, having knowledge of it. Without that knowledge, how is he going to practice Islam? Without the tools, how is any professional going to do his job? So the tools for the Muslim are knowledge. Knowledge is what enables you to practice your religion. In another statement from the Salaf, they said that knowledge, it's such a type of thing, so virtuous, that even the people who don't have it all want to claim that they have it. Everybody wants to claim to have knowledge. Nobody wants to say, I'm ignorant, I'm a nobody, I'm idiot, I'm this. Nobody's going to say that kind of thing about themselves. Everybody wants to be known to have knowledge, to be somebody of understanding of the Quran and the Sunnah. And they said, ignorance is such a despicable and despised thing that even those who are actually in ignorance, those who are actually in that jahl, want to declare their innocence of it. Knowledge is such that those who are not even within knowledge, they don't have knowledge, want to claim they have knowledge. But ignorance is so bad that those who are actually in it want to declare their innocence of it. Such is the difference between knowledge and ignorance. Ibn al-Qayyim gave the example of the dog, that even dogs have a difference between the knowledgeable dog and the ignorant dog. Because Islamically, you're allowed to have the hunting dog, though, has conditions. conditions that revolve around its knowledge. That does it go and fetch or hunt when you give it the order to do so? Does it stop when you tell it to stop? Does it know not to rip up that animal when it catches it because you have to go and slaughter it? Does it do all of those things? Does it have that knowledge and understanding? Then you can take it as a hunting dog. If it doesn't have those types of affairs, doesn't understand, goes and grabs the prey, rips it up and kills it before you go and slaughter it, then that type of dog doesn't have the knowledge, doesn't have the understanding, cannot be kept as a hunting dog. Ibn al-Qayyim said, look at that. A dog that is knowledgeable and understands, you can have as a hunting dog. That dog gets the honor. But as for a dog that is ignorant, push it aside, it cannot be used as a hunting dog. The knowledgeable dog superior to the ignorant dog. This is the virtue of knowledge. The virtue of knowledge. In the famous example, we've mentioned many a time before, the example of Muhammad ibn Abd al-Rahman al-Awqas. He used to be disabled and disfigured, his shoulders coming out and his neck non-existent, his head in his shoulders. And so they used to laugh at him and they used to mock him because of this physical disability he used to have when he was a child. So then his mother said to him, wherever you go, because of this disability of yours, people are always going to laugh at you. They're always going to make the jokes about you. So upon you, عَلَيْكَ بِالْعِلْمِ, upon you is to gain knowledge. He said those words, they struck me in my heart, and he began seeking knowledge. And when he grew old, physically he hadn't changed, his disability was all still there. But when he grew old, he became the judge of Mecca. And when the criminals, etc., the people, they used to come into his courtroom, they would be shivering in front of him, recognizing the level and the status of Muhammad ibn Abd al-Rahman al-Awqas from the knowledge that he had, from the knowledge that he'd gained, whereas years earlier, he was the one they all used to be laughing at because of his physical disability. Knowledge raised him. Allah raises those who seek knowledge of the religion. The example of Umar ibn al-Khattab and Nafi'. Umar ibn al-Khattab, the second Khalifa, when he was the Khalifa, he put Nafi' from the Salaf in charge of Mecca as a deputy. On one occasion, Nafi' came from Mecca to Medina to visit Umar ibn al-Khattab, the Khalifa. So Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu said to him, who have you temporarily left in charge of Mecca whilst you've come here? Because Nafi' was the one Umar had put in charge there. So when Nafi' has come here now, Umar says to him, who have you left in charge whilst you're away? So Nafi' said to him, I have left a man called Ibn Abza in charge. Ibn Abza in charge. Umar radiyallahu anhu said to him, who is this Ibn Abza? He said, Ibn Abza used to be one of our slaves there. He used to be one of our slaves, but he's a freed man now. He used to be a slave, but he's been freed now. So Umar said, radiyallahu anhu, a freed slave, a former slave, you left him in charge, meaning other people are going to listen to him. A former slave that used to be there amongst them, are they going to give him respect and authority and listen to him, knowing that he used to be one of their slaves before? So then Nafi' said, Ibn Abza is a man of knowledge when it comes to the Quran, when it comes to laws of inheritance, when it comes to this religion. He is a man of knowledge. And as a consequence of that, of course, everybody will respect him because of that knowledge and how Allah raises the people of knowledge. So Umar ibn al-Khattab said to Nafi', لَقَدْ سَمِعْتَ قَوْلَ نَبِيِّكَ sallallahu alayhi wasallam. He said, you certainly have heard the statement of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَرْفَعُ بِهَذَا الْكِتَابِ أَقْوَامًا وَيَضَعُ بِهِ الْآخَرِينَ. That indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raises people via this book, the Quran. those who learn and study and understand the Quran, then Allah raises them, that virtue of the people of knowledge. وَيَضَعُ بِهِ الْآخَرِينَ, and others are debased, degraded, lowered via this book, i.e. those who neglect the Quran, reject the Quran, do not give importance, do not learn it, then they are left low. Whereas those who learn and study and practice it, they are the ones Allah raises. This is the difference between the one who is upon knowledge and the one who is upon ignorance, the one who learns his religion and the one who does not. And that's why the scholars, they give so much encouragement all the time for the people to learn and to be serious in their studies, to learn their religion properly, especially for those who are young in age, 20s, 30s, 40s, it's all young in age yet. Then you have an opportunity more so than somebody who maybe becomes older than that. Because the younger you are, the more energy you still have, typically speaking, and the more strength in your memorization and ability you have, typically speaking. Not always, but normally. And so the scholars, they put down a lot of effort in trying to encourage the people to study, to learn, to use their time in knowledge. All the time when you see these pieces of advice from the scholars, every time they are saying the same type of thing. Busy yourself with the beneficial knowledge, busy yourself in learning, in studying, busy yourself in understanding the Quran and the Sunnah. As the Shaykh Al-Fawzan says, do not be a Muslim just by name. Don't just be a Muslim by name. And somebody asks you simple things, show me how to pray properly, you don't know. Show me how to make wudu properly according to the Sunnah, you say, I don't know, I can't do it. Then how? You are only being Muslim upon name, not understanding the aqeedah, the tawheed, what the basis of this religion of Islam is. That is not befitting of a believer. That is not suitable of a believer. On the day of judgment, every person will stand accountable for his deeds, accountable for what he has done, for what your actions were, how you practiced your religion. If you didn't have any knowledge, then what are you going to show for what you did in your life? How are you going to do any actions and practice the religion properly if you never gain knowledge of it? Because as we know, to be able to practice the religion, you need to have knowledge of how to do it. Al-ilmu qabla al-qawli wal-amal. Knowledge comes before statements and actions. You cannot just say, okay, I'm going to be a good practicing Muslim in that case. How are you going to do that? Only through seeking knowledge. How are you going to know how to be a good practicing Muslim and what to do and what the good things are, what the sunnahs are, except if you learn it. Without learning it, you're just going to remain a commoner all your life. Also, when it comes to studying, it is important to recognize the type of advice the scholars they give. When it comes to, for example, the serious study and learning properly, not just general knowledge. Because you can gain general knowledge of your religion, and then you can gain proper knowledge. Proper knowledge, i.e. the principles, the fundamentals, the foundations, the evidences, properly understand your religion. That's one thing. General knowledge, that's another thing. If you attend classes and you listen and then you go home, you will have benefited from that class. You will have remembered a few points of benefit from that class. But that's all you will have. All you will have are a few points of benefit that you benefited from that class, general knowledge. And then you attend again and again, and maybe all of your life you are attending classes like that. Then all you're doing is gaining a general knowledge of the religion. Picking up some points of benefit in this class, in that class, bits and bobs here and there, general knowledge. But that isn't what you want. What you want is the detailed, proper knowledge of your religion. The knowledge you can pass on to your children, to your grandchildren, to your families. You can't just pass on general knowledge without any real understanding. So the proper knowledge like that in the principles, that is only going to be learned if you have the right attitude to studying, the right attitude to learning. That is going to be, as the scholars say, you prepare the class before you even come to the lecture. These books that we're doing now, they're available in English online. You can even read the section in advance before you come to the class. Then in class you focus properly, and ideally, if you're serious, then you should make notes. And it puts you into that routine of studying properly, of learning properly, that you bring a book and that you make notes, or at least bring the book that is being studied. This book right now, for example, it's available in English. There are English versions available of the 6 fundamental principles by Shaykh al-Fawzan. So you could get that and you bring that to the class, and then you follow through what we're doing. And that will strengthen your knowledge a lot more than just listening. That you have the book and you're following through what we're saying and what we're reading. That will help you with your knowledge, and you can add on extra notes to that. And then after the class, that you revise. Revision is a big thing when it comes to knowledge. The Salaf, they used to say, Afatul ilm an-nisyan. The real calamity when it comes to knowledge, the real calamity is forgetfulness afterwards. That even if you come and you work hard initially, that you don't revise, you don't recap, and it all gets forgotten afterwards. That's the calamity, they used to say. So it needs revision afterwards. Some of the Salaf even used to say, spending the whole night revising the knowledge is more beloved to me than praying tahajjud. Some of the Salaf, they used to say that. إحياء الليل بالمذاكرة. That staying up the night, revising your knowledge, learning, recapping your knowledge, they used to say it is more beloved to me than tahajjud prayer, the night prayer. How come? Because the night prayer, when you pray it, you get the reward for it. You get up at night, you pray the night prayer, Qiyamul Layl, you get the reward for it, and that's it. But the knowledge, if you're revising, learning that knowledge, you benefit and get the reward for it. But on top of that, you can pass on that knowledge to your wife, to your children, to your parents, to your neighbors, to the community. And so they all benefit from you staying up and revising and learning. That's what they used to say. Because the benefit of knowledge, it passes on. You seek knowledge for 2 main reasons. Knowledge is sought for 2 reasons in one perspective of it. And that is to remove ignorance from yourself. You want to remove ignorance from yourself. You don't want to be just a Muslim by name. You want to be a Muslim who understands. So you seek knowledge to remove ignorance from yourself. But then secondly, a second intent you have as well is to then also be able to remove ignorance from others. That you can then benefit that knowledge, or with that knowledge, you can benefit your family, your children, your wife, your parents, to remove ignorance from others. You seek knowledge to remove ignorance from yourself, and also secondarily to remove ignorance from others. قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَهْلِيكُمْ نَارًا. As Allah told us in the Quran, protect yourselves and your families from the fire. The fire which has as its fuel men and stones. So this issue of seeking knowledge, it is something very important. Really, it should be a fixture in the diary of everybody. Just like you have a fixed item in your daily diary that you're going to eat at some point. Fixed into the diary, whether you write it or you don't write it, you're going to have a time somewhere, or 2 times, or even 3 times, or 4 times, where you're going to sit aside to eat. You're going to have a fixed thing in your diary every week or every 2 weeks where you have to sort out the shopping for your family. Fixed. You got to get it. You're going to have a fixed thing in your diary. You got to go fill up the car with petrol, diesel. You got to do it. Cannot just let it to go dry. Fixed in your diaries, you have to do these things. In that same way, or in a greater way, it should be a fixed default thing in your diaries that you're going to put time aside every week to seek knowledge properly as well. Notes, learning, revising. Right now we're on the 4th principle. Everybody here should know the first 3 reasonably well now. What does it mean reasonably well? Perhaps you could say that you can generally explain them with some evidences. You can explain the previous principles, what the point of them is, with some evidences. Everybody who's serious should be able to do that. But if it's a case now that the first principle, we want volunteers to explain to us the first principle and nobody can properly, or the second or the third, then it means all of us are only in the level of general knowledge. But that's not the level we want to be in. We want to be in the level higher than that, the more specific knowledge. That's why some of the scholars, they used to mention, when you come to a class, there are 2 types of people who come to classes. One type are the guests, and one type are the students. The students, they are the ones who come with their books and pens and pads, and they're serious about the class. The other group of people who come to classes, and it's still good that they attend, alhamdulillah, but they are guests. Meaning they haven't come as students with their books and pads and pens, and they're going to be writing and they're going to make notes. They've just come to listen. And that's good. It's good. But like I said, if that's all you do, you come as a guest like that, then all you're going to gain is general knowledge. You could be attending classes for 10 years. And after those 10 years, somebody asks you what the 6 principles are, you won't know. You never memorized them properly, what the 6 principles are. All you ever did was general knowledge. You might remember, yeah, there was something about the scholars in there in that book. That is not the level of knowledge you want. If you're serious, rectifying yourself, your life, you want to be able to teach your children as they are growing up, you want to be able to rectify your homes, your families, then it needs effort. لا ينال العلم براحة الجسد, as they used to say. Yahya ibn Abi Kathir, when he mentioned, knowledge cannot be achieved through relaxation of the body. If a person wants to relax, you're not going to gain knowledge. Knowledge takes effort. It's mentioned by Ibn Abi Hatim in the beginning, in the introduction of Al-Jarh al-Ta'deel, on one occasion when this is how the scholars were of the past, that on one time they were going through the market and they came across some fresh fish that looked really good. So they bought it and they took it home. But then they got so busy with their knowledge and everything, that day went and they never got to cook it. And in those days, there's no fridge. Then the second day, they got so busy with knowledge, they never got to cook it. Third day, they never got to cook it. So then in the end, they just ate it raw. It's going to go off otherwise. Such was the way of the scholars of the past, so serious in their knowledge. It's even mentioned about the scholars of our time. Al-Shaykh Al-Albani, rahimahullah ta'ala, they say about him that when he had his library refurbished, that a new door was being put onto his library. And that when that new door was being put on the room, his library room, a door, he said to the architect, to the builder, make sure it is a door that is a push door into the library. Don't make it a pull one that I have to pull out and then go in. Make sure you put the hinges in the way where it pushes into the library. The builder said to him, what's the big deal? Whatever door I get, if it's a pull one, it's a pull one. It's a big deal that it has to be pushed. Shaykh Al-Albani said to him, if it is a pull door, if I have to open it like this to get in, then every time I go to my library, to my books, then I'm going to have to stop at the door, pull it open and walk in. That's going to take me an extra second to get in every time. Whereas if it's a push door, it'll save me that second. I just walk straight in. So make it a push door, I can just walk straight into the library. This is how they focused on their time, how they realized. In another occasion it's mentioned about Shaykh al-Albani, he used to have an hour that he used to designate, for people ringing in, and he would answer their questions. So whatever time that was, maybe 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. for example. They mention on one occasion somebody rang him 1 minute before that hour began, before the call-in hour began. 4:59 p.m. for example. He ended up answering it, thinking maybe it's somebody else, not assuming it to be a caller asking questions. And the person said, I'm calling for the question and answer hour. The Shaykh said to him, no. Right now it's 4:59 or whatever time it was, 1 minute before the hour. He said, 1 minute left yet. This 1 minute is my private study time yet. In 1 minute you can call, then it opens up. You cannot take my time away from me extra. 1 minute before, he said to him, no, this is still my private study time yet. At 5 o'clock or whatever the hour was, it begins then, the calling hour. To that level, 1 minute. 1 minute. In 1 minute you could do a page, you could do 2 pages of reading, of studying a hadith, 2 hadith. This is how they are. So we have to really focus on knowledge. These classes, these gatherings that we have, they're not just gatherings that are just a routine. Routine every Friday, just come, sit, listen and go home. The purpose of these gatherings is that we're learning our religion to be able to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala properly, to be upon understanding of what our religion is, to better ourselves for our accountability on that day. So we need to be serious about these gatherings, not just keep them in mind as a routine thing, it just happens every Friday. Let's just go and sit and socialize and go home. In that way, 10 years will go by, 20 years will go by, white hairs everywhere, and you haven't really learned anything properly about your religion. So focus on it now. Focus on these classes, small books that we do, small points that we go through every week. Then you should memorize them, learn them, make notes, get into the habit of making notes in class. Not even to say that I'll listen to the recording afterwards. Not even that. The scholars, they used to say a person who comes to a class without a book is not a student. In class, you come with the book, even if it's the text available in English like we said. So that is what we should try and do and try and focus on to change our mindset when it comes to these gatherings and it comes to this knowledge. We'll round off on that point for today then. We'll carry on with the rest of the principle and then move on to the next one from the next sitting insha'Allah ta'ala. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.